Hi. Thank you, Linda, for such a great introduction. So let's get started. My goal is to, as Linda mentioned, to have a few minutes after our session for Q&A. I do encourage any offline communication after our call today as well, and I'll share more about contact information at the end of our time together. Please realize I know that on this call I have various people that have had different levels of exposure and usage of the earned value management techniques and tools that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So realize wherever you are on that range, the added benefit to your time with me today, in addition to getting a technical PDU credit, is more exposure and familiarity with the tools, and more specifically, seeing how, as another practitioner in the community of project managers, how I specifically used EVM. Now, realize that for me, in sharing the particular project that's near and dear to my heart that I'm going to use as my example, and during our time, using EVM provided me with an early warning detection system. So I was able to stay within the budget constraints to make the project doable. How many projects start out, and we know the scope can change, but realize again the idea here in our time together is to share in our community ways that we apply the knowledge and use the tools available to us. So this particular project that I'm referring to is taking approximately a 1,200 square foot property where I raised two children and several pets with a budget of approximately $20,000. I did have a contingency budget of 225. All right, all relative. Realize that the deliverables and the purpose of this renovation and remodeling was to create an Airbnb space after my youngest graduated from college. So this involved a complete update on the interior and exterior property, as well as knocking down walls and building new walls. Literally moved my laundry room and extended the master suite into a full bathroom suite as well, and then also to have an interior home office that was both the master bedroom suite and the home office segregated, separated from the rest of the property. Again, for the purpose of being on Airbnb's work registry. All right. So with that being said, we know that in order to stay on that tight of a budget, this involves planning and lots of it, and being very careful with our choices. All right. So I do want to say, what is our role as a project manager? Every one of you could share specific insight on what you think you bring to the table when it comes to project management. But we all, I think, would agree that it does give us an opportunity, a framework, so that we can approach with confidence that we can solve these tough challenges. And you know, one of the number one reasons why I think this is so is vocabulary. I know there's nuanced differences in each industry on how we use our project management skills. PMBOK, this having that framework, that foundation, the consistency in the language is huge. It's a huge benefit. But I also think it's important to mention that as with any tool or any knowledge that you may gain, there are no silver bullets. In other words, I love the way Fred Brooks, I was a huge fan of his in the late 90s. Early 90s rather. You know, he's with IBM. If you're not familiar with him, yes, I'm dating myself a bit here. But what he says that I love, and I have this, framed, no single development in either technology or a management technique, which by itself promises even one order of magnitude within a decade. Okay, hear this, a decade. This is written in 1986 in productivity, in reliability, and simplicity. For those of you that have been in the industry as long as I have, you've seen some tremendous advances in both our management styles and techniques that we can you learn and share and employ, but also with technology, which is I love technology, I truly do. But again, there is no silver bullet. So what I'm sharing with you today is how I specifically use EVM for a project to stay on task and complete successfully that task. So just know again, it's knowing what your tools are. Now, I love Microsoft Project. Speaking of technology, Microsoft Project 365 are going to be the screenshots that you're going to see today of this specific project. And I will share that the first version of Microsoft Project that I worked with was Microsoft Project version 3.0. Some of you may date back with that, Microsoft product to that version. It's come a long ways. But even acknowledging the extreme advances that we've had in technology in my lifetime that I've seen, and I learned phonetics, input output, Rose Hill Elementary School at the age of 5, basic input output to an entire room. All right, so again, we've come a long ways. Beginners, all purpose, symbolic, instructional code, basic first, then went to visual basic. But regardless, tools are just tools and they're only as good as they are used. We as project managers will continue to be needed because, again, a tool is only as good as the tool is applied. And that I'm counting in that AI, which I am impressed with. All right, so when I teach EVM, and that is my heart is to share information and help others learn and gain from experiences, some of them painful. It varies the length of time, obviously, that I have with someone. Our time together is short, but during this time, you're still going to be more familiar with the EVM, how it earned value management is used in project management process, how the terminology and concepts specific to EVM, and how we use this information to calculate our project performance and make corrective actions as needed. I'm going to divide up my slides into 3 parts. The first part is, as you see here on this slide, determining key metrics. It starts with the beginning, the schedule. Seems simple, right? I hear something out loud laughing in the background. It takes a lot to involve a tight schedule, that planning. Part 2, what are the earned value metrics? What are we using? It's all about comparison. I'm just going to say that right now. There is going to be some repetition in what we do say. All right, so know that part 3 is going to be how do we use this calculated information that we refer to as earned value measurements, and that is where we get into working with variances and indices in order to help us, again, predict and to manage our projects effectively. All right. So what are 2 things? And I know when I say 2 things, you're probably counting the 100 things. And I know that some of you are already thinking triple constraint right now. We'll address that. Again, part of the benefit of the time today is more repetition with terms that many of us are familiar with or gaining familiarity with. And that is, what are we talking about here? Keeping it simple. Your AC, a lot of acronyms. You're going to see this often. Actual cost, AC actual cost. So planned value, PV, compared to actual cost. How much do I think I'm going to spend, and how much am I actually spending? All right. So then again, we got what else? The primary. It's going to be your schedule. A task takes longer than expected. Materials, you might need more materials. You may need to extend your labor cost. But that's going to affect your budget. It's going to affect your money. Now, I do know we do have the triple constraint. What is it? Scope. I know many of you are screaming, scope, scope. What about scope? Scope, schedule, and cost. Scope, as much money as you can put into a project, scope sometimes does get affected. And when scope is affected, you may affecting one or both of these 2 areas, your actual cost and your schedule variance that you may be experiencing, being off schedule, SV, schedule variance. PV plan value, AC actual cost, PV plan value, SV, again, schedule variance. Triple constraint, what is it? Scope, cost, and schedule. All right, so time phasing, this is huge right here, because all of these, the calculations that we're going to come up with are going to show a monetary value. So you're like, well, wait a minute, what about schedule again? How are you doing a schedule variance and coming up with a dollar amount? Well, realize what we're referring to here is time phasing. Time phasing, what does that mean? Schedule, is the project ahead or behind schedule? Is the project over or under budget? Time phasing is the distribution of cost over a defined period based on a prediction of when costs are expected to be incurred. So again, that's where Microsoft Project as a tool comes in handy. Now, could you perform EVM, earned value management, and manage your project outside of a tool like Microsoft Project? Most certainly. But Project does indeed help us with this process. And again, whether we're doing it manually, all manually, or whether we're using pen and paper and a calculator or a worksheet or a wonderful tool like Microsoft Project, we are needing to reckon in time phasing. So what you're seeing below this on the slide is, now how much work do you plan to complete? All about that planning. Now, BCWS is another term specifically in Microsoft Project, budget cost of work schedule. Budget cost work schedule. So that is the same thing as planned value. So people might think that budget cost work schedule makes more sense than to say planned value, but we're talking about the same thing. Traditionally, planned value since the 60s, Microsoft Project, budget cost work scheduled. It uses both labels in the system on the reporting that we create. So then you got EV, earned value. What is this earned value? Budget cost work performed, work schedule, work performed. Planned value, earned value. How much work have we completed? Now there's some subjectivity obviously that plays a part here, and that's what we're trying to get away from and keep it to where it's more based on 1 plus 1 is 2. All right, so then you go into actual cost. Actual cost work performed. How much did it cost to complete the work? Status reporting. Status reporting, status is the key word. Again, it wouldn't help us much to just have a plan and then come at the end and say, okay, what do we do from the beginning of the plan to the end of the plan? This is how we control and monitor and make corrective actions as needed. And sometimes when we're ahead of schedule, there are times where we might need to back that up a little bit too. And I'm sure every single one of you could give me specific examples of when that is the actual case. All right, so a picture tells 1,000 words. I love this picture. You will see it again before we're done. But what we're seeing here is you're seeing that, again, this is where are we employing? EVM is used during the planning execution phases of our projects. Color coding, wonderful tool here. PV. So this first part of the slide that you see here is, what do I think I want to spend? What's my actual cost budget? We said we want to try to do this project in particular at 20 grand with a contingency fee for the known unknowns, if you will, of 225. All right, so we're taking in consideration both our budget and our schedule. How much is everything going to cost? How much are materials, labor, whatever, to our planned value? Over here on the right is where you're seeing your actual cost. This is before, and this is while we are executing and monitoring, controlling our project execution. So again, both of these that you see here are feeding into the earned value. So that's what we're going to talk about, is those formulas for how do we calculate the earned value so we have something to compare. But please make a mental picture or a picture of this particular chart. I do think it's very helpful. All right, so again, taking back to the basics, here is some repetition, more on the terms. EVA is something you're going to hear too, and I get asked all the time, what's the difference between earned value analysis and earned value management? Well, again, depending on who you're listening to, what you're reading, sometimes there's nuanced differences. The way I define the difference is what we are doing is an analysis. That's how we're monitoring and controlling. We're doing analysis based on the earned values that we're calculating and that we're managing throughout the project. So sometimes you will hear EVA and EVM used interchangeably. There are some slight differences. All right, so what do we need in order to figure out our earned value? Well, first of all, we've got to have a status date. Okay, this is when we're starting, and at this point in time, this is where we're going to do our status date. So where are we at as far as comparing our planned values to our actual values? Status dates known as plural. All right, total value of a project is your your budget at completion. And some of the, it's funny when you work with people, especially people that are first exposed to earned value management. What I've heard so often is, well, how do I know my budget at completion? If it's budget at completion, isn't that what my budget is at the completion of the project? You're predicting, you're planning what your budget at completion is going to be. This is still the planning stage. Total value of project is back. Budget at completion, but it's still a planning factor. And there are times where, you do that first status check, at the start of the project, especially a project of length, like nearly a year-long project. Some projects are longer, as we have all probably participated, if not managed. All right, so realize there are times where we need to reestablish what our back is, reevaluate it. But the back is at the planning stage. It is the budget at completion, plan value. Think of it as an aggregate of all your plan values. Task 1, task 2, task 3 is going to cost, this is my plan value based on the length of time it's going to take, the labor it's going to take, the materials it's going to take. And so I'm going to add all of those PVs together, and that's going to give me my back, the budget at completion. Percent complete, that's the EV. That's what we're talking about here is how do we calculate the earned value. So we're going to talk about that percent complete. That's how we're going to get that earned value. But in order to calculate that earned value, we need to know what our planned value is. We need to know what our budget completion is, and we need to have our status date. All right, so we have to know how much time has passed since the project is launched or kicked off. And that includes our actual cost. So again, you're going to get very familiar if you're not already familiar with BAC, PV, EV, AC. Sometimes when people just start talking in those terms, though, it can be a little confusing. All right, so again, saying the same thing, just a little bit more of a description. What do we need? What is our status date? What is our aggregate of our PVs, our planned values throughout the project, which is our BAC? What is our earned value at this point, at this status date check? And then that includes whatever our actual cost. All right, so again, let's take a look, getting back to the project at hand. And yes, some of you are recognizing that's Microsoft project in the lower right corner. But the first part, you got to create a schedule. All right, that's what you got to do for earned value management. You have to have a schedule in place. It's not as simple as it sounds. Some of you are probably chuckling a little bit when I say, oh, all you have to do is have a schedule. But we do know that when we come up with a schedule, that we need to determine the cost and the estimate length of each task that make up that schedule. The level of detail is going to vary. There are so many different ways I could have set up this specific project that I managed to success. And I want to use that word, because we all know sometimes when it can be a little gnarly, some of the scenarios that we run into and have to work out. Problem solving is one of my favorite gifts and strengths. So again, just realize that part of scheduling is how detailed are you? Is this a definitive plan? Or you're just, what are you wanting to create? Of course, if you're on a very tight budget, the more definitive you can be, the better. Bottom-up approach, more detail. Identifying the prerequisites for each task. If you're wondering what I'm referring to there, think of it as predecessor, successor. Does this task have to be completed before this task begins? So, for example, I would have to cut electricity before I would take out a pool, and you'll see that shortly too. But once we do that, that's what we're scheduling. And to see how it looks on Microsoft Project, again, you're seeing a timeline. I'm not expecting you to be able to read the detail, but you're seeing the detail. Again, I divided up exterior, interior. You can see the tasks. You can see the different elements that we've just been talking about. As far as my BAC, my aggregate of my PVs, my planned values, those you're seeing them there. All right, so just to give you a little bit better of a shot of this so you can see it. And I'm ME, Mary Elizabeth, and just TK is Tom Kern, my guy and partner in this project. So with that understanding, you can see the detail I came up with, but no matter how much you plan, you can see my summary tasks and how I divide up in exterior and interior. But the first part, schedule. Now, again, we're talking about the status date. So in my planning, I came up with my status dates and my schedule based on milestone events that involve electricity and plumbing and construction. What you're seeing here on the left side of the slide came straight from Microsoft Project. So you can see that my project was launched August 7th, 2017, and the finish date, you can see what it was. At this point, this was before any work was completed, and that's what you're seeing here in the lower left. But something I just want to draw attention to here is my work and my duration. And again, depending on, I could have set this up differently in Microsoft Project, same project. So again, depending on you as the project manager and what's important to you determines how you set it up. My work is in form of hours. My duration is in form of days. Part of my goal with Airbnb was to have it completed, my part completed and ready for inspection by August 1st. All right, so that's what I was looking at. And so I wanted to give myself a little bit of a lag there, between my date that was scheduled a year in advance with Airbnb and the work that I was doing. So realize that there's 24 hours in a day. I get that, but depending on resources and hours, that the work hours can exceed the duration, but it obviously feed into each other. My goal was based on a date that was comprised of work that involved hours. So just keep that in mind. This is what we're looking at. So initially in the planning stage, this is important as well. So I told you I wanted to do this within 20,000. In my planning stage, I came up with the 225 contingency budget. But you can see even in the planning stage, I exceeded by 190. All right. So it's all relative. I do understand, but dollars count, time counts, dates matter. That's why we have jobs. All right, do a lot of contract work. So my first status date was November 1st. So we're going to fast forward. We're in part 2. We have our schedule. We're looking at it. And now what we want to do, after we start, we came up with our status dates. We got all our planned values. So now what we're doing is we're going to calculate the planned values with actual costs as they're incurring. So you can see, oh, wow, look here. So when we're doing our status check on November 1st, you can see that now the system, my tool, Microsoft Project, is telling me that I'm going to exceed 20 grand by $390, not just 190. So I'm looking at this and seeing what the hours are and what work has been done based on the completion here. What happened? Why is this telling me that I've even exceeded my contingency on the planning based on what the forecast is now showing me? All right, well, there were 2 tasks that in that first part where I divided up the work needed to be done into exterior. Task 4 and task 9 involved clearing out, just literal hard labor work, clearing out the property, the creek and the vines and where the deck and removing the debris. Well, it was rather shocking once we got under these vines that were as large as me, no joke. And one of the neighbors came up and to see what we were doing and said, those vines have been here longer than you. Get my property. But once we got in there and started digging, there were these huge poles. I mean, cement poles buried under huge, anticipate that. It was more than what we could do in the contractor. So I realized all of my pricing that I came up with was fixed pricing. Now we know that when we choose fixed pricing, it puts a lot of burden on the vendor. In this case, my contractor, because he was supplying all the materials, all the costs, all of it. Now he had myself and TK as labor. So that we could do that. And I could do what I could do. I did a lot more than I thought I could. But understanding that puts a burden on the contractor. So there was a trust factor in there as well. I didn't want my contractor, who is also a good friend, I'm friends with his family, to eat any costs that might occur of unexpected, the unknown unknowns, as we all know happen. So we did talk about it, and what I ended up doing was coming up with, call it management funds, at hard labor, $100 for day work. And again, we got some long days out there. I rolled up my sleeves. I was doing what I could do as well. But again, for task 4 and task 9 cleaning, I did incur $200 extra between the start of the project and this first status date. So the question is, we got a lot more to do. You can see here we are only 37% done, 39, depending on how you're looking at the duration there. So thinking about this, if this was going to continue, where based on the amount of work that was completed between the start of the project and this first status check, if this was going to continue, cost per index, we'll talk more about what we call CPI for those of you who are familiar with it, then I would need to calculate, okay, I'm going to need some additional funds. And I'll just let you know that is how Microsoft Project was looking at this. And we're going to look at the formulas, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself right now. We will circle back around. But I had to decide, is this going to be a one-time deal between start of the project and now, and we're not going to incur any more at $200? Or is this going to be a continual trend where I'm going to need to bring on this labor, additional person, additional cost? All right, so again, time phasing, helpful to have tools like Project, but that's something as a project manager using a tool like Microsoft Project, I had to make this decision. So again, that goes back to our budget completion, all of our planned values, that time phasing. So understanding that, is this something that I'm going to need to phase in? So let's talk about our earned value. We're going to come back to that question that I just asked. We're still in the status report period, November 1st, figuring out what does this information mean, and we're calculating it. All right, so go back in time with me. All right, so again, this is still part 2. We're getting our now earned value. How are we getting this earned value? And again, you see the summary task here for my exterior that's added together. You can see all of these tasks right here were 100% complete. Either they're done or they're not, based on the planned value and the actual. So you can see that part of exterior has not even been started. You know, that as far as the date of when it's to begin. So that's why you're seeing zeros here. So the system's calculated based on time phasing that I'm 80% done. All right, with this, and so percent complete. How do we figure this out? Well, again, it's obvious if it's 100%. How does it know the 80? You know, what you're doing is you're taking your planned value and multiplying it by your actual, in this case, cost, if it's actual cost, and then divide it by your planned value. But you do that for every task that's made up of the summary task. All right, so you're seeing down here at the bottom of the slide. So again, you take task one and you multiply it by, okay, so if we're going to take this 25-day one, we'll just use this as our example. All right, so if it's 25 days, let's say that I am halfway in between when the schedule start and end date are for this particular task, so I can stay on target here. So I'm looking at this. So let's say I have only completed half, and I'm halfway through, the time. So I would take, let's say I had, my completed actual work right here. Let's say it was 50. So I would take 50 times my planned work and divide it by the actual planned work, and that's what you're seeing here. So task one times percent complete plus task two planned hours times percent complete. 10 hours times 0.5, for example, divided by 10. All right, so again, it's giving you that times 100, and that's what's going to give it to you. So we're going to look at this again, but that's how we're calculating our earned value at a specific point in time. All right, so here we go. Reporting project performance status. Again, we're still on November 1st. It's showing you a little bit more of the detail of what I'm talking about, the earned value and actual cost. All right, any questions about that? We're going to come back to it. So once we know what our planned values are and our actual costs, and we've calculated that. So again, you got your planned value, your earned value, and actual cost. Notice in this instance, what's the difference? 200. That's our summary. It's letting us know that. SV, scheduled variance. Okay, so if I had a scheduled variance, which is taking my work performed, subtracting my work scheduled, in other words, EV, earned value, subtracting my planned value, what is the scheduled variance? In this instance, there is no variance. I'm not behind schedule. Now, the reason why we were able to stay on schedule is because myself and Tom, we were going to put in the extra hours needed, and we did. All right, so that is why we didn't get off schedule. We did get off cost because we had to have our additional person involved there. So SPI, just going back to what are we talking about at the beginning? The schedule, where we're comparing actual cost and schedule variance, where we're comparing planned value to schedule variance and actual cost to your planned value too. So SPI, work performance, work scheduled. So if I were off scheduled, how much? If I'm ahead of schedule, it's going to be, a positive. If I'm behind, it's going to show a negative. So you can see on the SPI calculator project, we were on schedule with our remaining tasks. But cost variance, again, EV minus AC, negative 200. So at this point, we know that we have a negative number here. So our CPI, notice the patterns in here, is going to be EV divided by AC. So again, you're seeing the patterns. EV divided by AC is what it's showing you here. So cost per index, I mentioned a moment ago, work performed divided by, and I see that. So actual cost work performed. All right, so my CPI is 0.96. So if I thought that this variance was going to continue, I would use this index. I would use the 0.96, and I would divide my back by it in order to get what I think I need at the estimate at completion. Estimate completion would be based on, if I thought this trend was going to continue, my CPI, 0.96. So I would take back, divided it by 0.96. I'm not that far off, obviously, by the total value. It depends on what your numbers are. TCPI. So you're seeing a pattern here. For those of you, again, I know I have various people on this call that have different levels of exposure, but TCPI, to complete performance index. Remaining project work divided by remaining project money. Again, time phase, time is money. All right, so with this understanding, if that's greater than 1, I'm over budget. So in other words, what do I need to do as far as my earned value from this point on, the remainder of my status checks, to keep my original back, my budget at completion? And to keep that original budget completion, if this were the case, where I see exterior, my TCPI be 1.1, what that is telling me is my earned value needs to be $1.10 for every dollar calculated in order to have the budget completion be what it was in the planning phase. All right, so that's what the TCPI. It's a performance index, but it's letting me know what I need to do correctively in order to end up with the original back. Sometimes that's not possible. We understand that. All right, so again, going back to patterns, most of us are patterns. The earned value we know is used with the schedule variance as well as with the actual cost. We saw at the beginning, we'll go back to it. But just know right here, the CPI represents project's current cost efficiency. Remember, ours was 0.96. We knew we were over budget by $200. TCPI, in that instance, I would need to do $1.10 if that's what that came out with. That example I showed you, it did at one point. So we look and we make corrections. So $1.10, I would have to have earned value of $1.10 for every dollar earned value from this point forward, so that my end back budget at completion is what it was at the planning stage. All right, so CPI is the actual efficiency. TCPI is the estimate forecast of efficiency. $1.10 for every dollar earned value. All right, so now we're in part 3. We're looking at our estimate completion. How are we using these numbers? All right, so again, you look down here, you're seeing we're off by 200. I believe it's a one-time event. So my estimate completion, I would not want to take my back and divide by CPI, because I don't plan for that to continue. Those are two very large hard labor projects, and there's a lot I can do. There's a lot that TK can do. So number 2 is not going to be the best choice for me. Now, look at 1. We're taking the actual cost plus estimate to completion. So it's estimate to complete. This is how much I need to complete in my project. So take that plus the actual cost, what I've spent. And a lot of people think that's what I need at my estimate completion. But again, how do you figure out your estimate to completion? Well, let's just say all of my numbers are wrong for whatever reason. I was trying to go in the planning stage and had the contractor completely involved in that planning process. Let's say for whatever reason, more discoveries, it's just we know we're way off. Then what you may need to do, and this can take some time, is bottom up, literally go from bottom up and reevaluate. Go back to the planning phase. Go back to the planning phase and go through each and every task and reevaluate what those costs are, and then add them together and come up with a new back. Well, it really is your estimate to complete at that point, because your project's in progress. So think of it that way. That is oftentimes the most accurate. All right, so in mine, my estimate to complete, I just took all my additional planning values because I did not believe that they were going to change, and I added that to my actual cost. And that was how I was managing my estimate at completion, because I knew that I was not going to make this happen. It was not going to be an ongoing trend. We were 35% into the project. We got a lot more to go. All right, so again, actual cost. You can see another way that you can actually calculate estimate to completion, or estimate at completion rather. So just realize again, that's the importance of being the project manager, is and your experience and your knowledge and your intuition and status checks. So variance at completion. What are we talking about? Taking that that back, that budget at completion, subtracting my estimate at completion, and that's going to give me variance at completion. Getting back to more terms, I knew my variance at completion, even on November 1st, it was not going to be more than a negative 200. I did not want it to be more than negative. But again, that's just another way of using the numbers. Again, how do we use it? Earned value management. Got to get the actual values in order to do our analysis. And that's what we've been talking about. And that includes variance analysis, trend analysis, and forecasting. staying on track, reducing what I refer to as unnecessary stress that goes with any project. All right, so how do we interpret that? That again is your role as project manager. We could give a TCPI, colon in the number, and email it to someone. They don't know what we're talking about. What are we actually saying? All right, so plan value, actual cost, earn value. Where are we at this point in time? Where do we need to be in order to stay on track, or what additional funding maybe we need to have? All right, again, going back to patterns, for those of us that are PMPs and took the project management professional exam, know that these formulas were all memorized. I remember when I first learned that I couldn't take in my tools or even a worksheet, I was like, what? But the patterns are there. I do like my tool though, Microsoft Project. Tool's only as good as the tool is used. We do know this. How do you interpret it? We've been talking throughout, and again, our time is limited that we have, but just know that's your role. Is you've got to figure out what to do. And there are times when you're ahead of schedule or under budget where that also could be a warning sign. So that again is your role, sharing specific ways of applying earned value management. Here's a milestone report straight out of Microsoft Project. You can see all my dates. Very helpful. I love the visuals. All right, so fast forward, beginner project, end of project, straight from Microsoft Project, $200. We did finish on time. The reason I'm making reference to 24 hours is, again, put in a lot of hours. TK and I definitely blood, sweat, and tears went into this project. But I would say and count that this project was a success. And again, if you remember, we got to have a way to measure all things. And in my reporting process, I do want to say that I did make the superhost on the work register, and I'm very grateful, especially now during COVID, because I have regulars that come in for work. I had a lot of restrictions on no more than 2 people, no pets, no children. I wanted to maintain my property. So I know that was quick, and time is limited today as far as what we have together. But you see my contact information here. I am in the community. I do, project management community. I would love to work with all of you at some point in time. And so I do want to offer for those of you who are on this call, and again, we have a few minutes left over for Q&A. But for those of you who are not able to get your questions answered, I do offer a complimentary 30-minute virtual project analysis where we could brainstorm together, discuss, and specifically how to use EVM in Microsoft Project. Microsoft Project 365 provides some excellent tools with EVM built in. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and hand it back over to Linda.